Allow Dr. Jennifer Dugan, our Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, Rob. And you did such a beautiful job introducing Wazhma in your invitation to the community. And so I quickly revised what I wrote to not repeat some of that stuff. But I wanted to just say that, just to kind of honor Wazhma's agreement to be here with us. In early October, I reached out to her to ask about her interest in talking to the UPike community. And it was right after the late August withdrawal of the US from Afghanistan. And I knew that asking her might be a sensitive thing. I mean, you know, it's a very powerful event for so many people. And I asked that, you know, she take the time and maybe this wasn't a good time. And she wound up getting back to me and seemed, you know, willing to come and talk with us. And I'm just overjoyed that she could be here with us this morning. She's a diplomat. She really contributed so much to our Model UN team at Randolph College. And I just marvel at what you've come to do, Wazhma, there at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And it's just so impressive, your many talents. I'm especially, you know, taken by your continued engagement with the Institute. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that today, for women and what brought you to Randolph and that sort of thing. So anything you can share with us, I think is going to be a real learning experience for us here at UPike. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both Rob and Professor Dugan. Yeah, maybe so I'll just start a little bit about how I made it here, like how did I get here? And then I'll talk a little more about some topics that I thought about last night to share. I actually had to think a lot. I thought before going to dinner, I was thinking about it during dinner, after dinner. These kind of conversations are, especially for me, given the recent events, it's hard to have this type of conversation. It can be very uncomfortable. It's gloomy stories to share. But I think after thinking a lot, I thought maybe I'll share a perspective that you probably may not find it in books or in the media. Maybe I'll just share like how I was affected, how I looked at it, or how I'm still looking at it. What was the biggest lesson I learned? But I don't mean to just talk for the next 30 minutes. I think it's hard to cover a lot with these kind of conversations. So I'll just set the tone and then let's just have a dialogue. Let's open it up. I'll answer questions that you may have. I'm sure you probably have a lot of questions. I'm happy to answer them. So quick background, I actually left Afghanistan during the Civil War. I was less than 5 years old. My family had to fled during the war. We left as refugees in Pakistan for over 12 years. This was during the time the Taliban took over Afghanistan. I have 3 sisters, so my parents had 4 girls and they just couldn't afford to live under the Taliban regime. I studied in Pakistan. I left as a refugee. I was actually an undocumented refugee, both myself and my whole family. I had no identity, but I was young at the time. I didn't realize what it means not to have an identity or not to have a country or not to belong. I was still growing up. I think it impacted me in many ways that I'm uncovering them now. But I was a child. I didn't really realize a lot growing through that period. But then after 2001, once like Taliban's were broken and the country, US moved to Afghanistan, schools were opened back, and schools was one of the reasons going to school, going to university was one of the reasons my family decided to move back to Afghanistan. And it was for the first time everyone had a hope that we could belong to some place, we could have a country, we can work hard and build our lives around it. So it was a very exciting time. I think it was around 2003 or 2004 that we decided to move back to Afghanistan. I still remember the day that we moved. I hadn't, because I left Afghanistan as a young kid, I didn't remember the details of it. I had heard stories about it from my parents. all really good and exciting stories that they remembered, like how my parents went on a date, like what they did, like things that they did as young couples there. So we moved back, and I think that's when we were all excited. There was a lot to hope. There was a lot to dream. We thought that, okay, now you can have a driving license for the first time in your life. You couldn't have that in Pakistan. You could buy a house. How amazing is that? You could build a business. You could go to school. And after a couple of years, I applied for a scholarship. So there was a woman in Rhode Island, an American woman, heard about Afghan stories and how Afghan women weren't allowed to go to school during the whole time that the Taliban regime was in Afghanistan. So she wanted to do something about it. It was just one woman, and I think it's very powerful because one woman watched the news, decided to do something about it, rallied her friends, started having fundraiser in her dining room. And after a few fundraising, she started reaching out to schools and secured scholarships for Afghan girls to come and study in the United States. And her goal was two things: give Afghan women a chance to come and have a liberal education, but then at the same time to increase the awareness between Afghan community and American community. She wanted students in colleges or just people in the United States to actually hear it firsthand from Afghan girls, that what it means to live in Afghanistan, what the life is like, and how hopefully over time we increase that understanding and become better partners, because at the end of the day, we're just humans. It doesn't matter where you were born in Afghanistan or in the United States. I think she had a very noble idea, and she worked really hard. It all started with just one person and private donations. She brought, I think, over the years, over 100 girls. I was one of them. Luckily, Randolph gave me admission. So I left my house by myself, all the way from Afghanistan, came to Randolph College to actually pursue my higher education. It was a big deal for me and my family because even until then, we hadn't been able to start going to college in Afghanistan. So the fact that although I'm the fourth child, I was the first one to go to college. So it was a moment of celebration for all of us. I felt really good to come to school and actually finish my school. And once I came to the United States, I think my 4 years at Randolph, it was amazing. I got to know so many great people. I learned about so many cultures, so many countries, things that I never knew about it. And I think I made lifetime friends. Some of professors or some of the students or some of my best people, they're my support system right now, because remember when I came to the United States, I came alone without my parents, without having any family members in the United States. But I grew also a lot. I learned how to build my own support system. I learned how to build a new home. I learned how to build a new family. And most importantly, just absorb and learn new way of thinking, new way of working with each other, and everything that comes with it. And during the school, I was in Professor Dugan's class, her model year class. So I actually came to New York for the first time as part of the Model Year Conference. And I think once I came to New York, I fell in love with New York. So I knew that after graduation, I was going to move to New York City, get a job, and live here. I didn't know what was it that I loved about New York, but I knew New York felt like home. I just felt like I belonged to New York City, so I had to get a job to come here. Long story short, right before I was graduating, I got a job with PricewaterhouseCoopers in New York City, and I've been working with them for over 10 years now. I love what I do. I love the city. I love everything that comes as part of this package. And I'm so glad to be here today talking to you guys. So that's just a short summary of how I've come here, how I've made it all the way to here. So back to what I was thinking last night to share. So I thought about, maybe I'll just make it a little bit personal, share my personal perspective, because what happened in August is still very fresh. It's still very painful. I think as Afghans, we have gone through this multiple times. But this time it hurt a little bit more, or it hurt probably a lot, because we just lost hope. It just felt like, okay, it's like end of the world almost for us. We don't know what to hope for after this. So I have an Afghan passport, and that passport is going to expire in a couple of months. So when my passport expires, I cannot renew my passport because the government that issued my passport doesn't exist anymore. It's really hard to convey what it means not to have a country, or like not to have an ID, but it's probably, if you think about it right now, in a couple of months, I don't have an identity. I cannot travel anywhere. If you imagine, if you don't have an ID, you can't really cross the border, go to Canada. You can't cross the border, go to Mexico. You need a form of ID to do that. I'm not going to have it. And I live in one of the best countries in the world. Now imagine about all those people who are still stuck in Afghanistan. They don't have an ID. They cannot get an ID. They live under a regime that is not recognized or shouldn't be recognized. It's really hard to think where your life goes from there. But I think it's also really hard to think what happens when a government collapses. So Afghan government, and I think to kind of take a pause there, there are very few cases in life where you can see something start, mature, and collapse. Like the whole cycle. Like we all saw Afghanistan kind of start maturing out of nothing in the past 20 years. Businesses started booming, schools started, girls started going to colleges. We had movies made in Afghanistan, things that were all frozen before that. But then we also kind of saw how it peaked, and then it just collapsed under 1 hour. If you think, like, no one really thought it would collapse. No one thought US would walk away. No one thought that we would just lose it under an hour. But we literally lost Afghanistan, and the government collapsed under an hour. It was a Sunday. Sundays, so weekend in Afghanistan is Friday and Saturday. So Sunday is our Monday. It was Sunday, everyone was at work. Around 10 o'clock, the Taliban surrounded the city. By 11 o'clock, the government collapsed. So people were at work, right? So suddenly everybody had to leave and leave the offices, go back to their families, go back to safety. And suddenly people also realized everyone who worked for the government, everyone who were like in media and everything, that all the values they stood for, they were all at risk. They had to protect themselves, they had to protect their family, and it's a very uncertain time. So everybody started leaving their offices to go back home at the same time. And then what happens, there were gridlocks on the road. So like imagine all the highways now packed with cars, and everyone is trying to get to a place, but no one could get anywhere because when a government collapsed, the whole fabric of society disintegrated. It wasn't like in here, so if you have a gridlock, you know that, okay, police is going to show up, there will be an ambulance, they will take a couple of hours, eventually they will open the road and you will drive. That doesn't exist once you lose a government. Once you lose a government, the road belongs to the government. The government maintains the road. The government has the police. The government has the ambulance. When the government collapses, the road belongs to nobody. So what do? People left their cars. They had to walk to their homes, because then when you don't have a government, you're left with your own 2 feet and you have to figure out how to do it. That's really what happened that Sunday. And that was just the beginning of it. I think it is still very hard for a lot of us to even accept that was the reality, but it happened. And I think that's why it's very hard when a government collapses, because it's really hard to convey the impact, because it really impacts every single person. Like when a government collapses, it doesn't matter if you're wealthy or if you're mentally challenged or if you're just a normal person, you're going to be impacted by it. So now imagine people who are actually mentally challenged, like what happened to them when a government collapsed. They already have a hard time living during a normal time, and now they have like absolutely nothing. Like I have a family member who's in that case. It's actually really, really hard to think about them. but then also it's imagine if you're a woman in that society, like imagine a household with a woman as a head of household, like what happens to them right now? Imagine if you're a girl and now you have to live under a regime that fundamentally hates women. Like you have no freedom, you have no rights, you have no protection. And I have cousins who are like sophomores and juniors at school who cannot go back to school because the schools were shut down for women. I know friends who are professors at schools. They cannot teach. My aunts had really good jobs at different companies and within the government organizations. They all are at home right now. I had aunts who are the primary breadwinner of their families, and now they live under poverty. But it's not just women; it's also men. I have an uncle who's a physician. He actually worked for the. He was an army surgeon. He was an independent person. He made enough money to make good life for himself and his family. He hasn't been paid since August, but because he's a doctor and he was an army surgeon, he still has to show up to his job. But he cannot provide for his family. He is living under poverty right now. He can't even buy food for his family, but he still has to show up because he works for an army hospital and treat the Taliban soldiers right now, because if he doesn't, they'll kill him and his family. So, but at the same time, the government doesn't exist. So that's his life, that's his reality right now. And I think we tend to dehumanize the wealthy people usually in these circumstances, but it's important to think that when a government collapses, everyone is impacted. Imagine, someone who built an empire in the past 20 years out of nothing. There are people who work really, really hard, made millions of dollars in the past 20 years, built businesses, everything around it. And those people became bankrupt in an hour. Like all the wealth, the money that they had that were saving in banks just disappeared between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock because those banks don't exist anymore. It's I think really hard. Like I still, when I think back about it, it's really hard to even understand it. It's really hard to think about it. It's really hard to acknowledge it. But that's the reality of people back in Afghanistan. And it's only getting worse. It's not getting better because you can't really have anything if you don't have a government. That's just not going to work. Like there are a lot of things that we just take for granted. Like, okay, someone cleans the trash. Someone takes care of the roads. Someone is actually make sure you have electricity. All the basic things. It actually doesn't exist. And I think going through this whole time, the biggest lesson that I probably learned was that we have to make sure that we don't get complacent. We don't, the opportunities are always not going to be there. And we shouldn't take for granted what we have, whether that's a good economy, whether that's a good government, whether that's freedom of speech, whether that's democracy. I think what we learned or what we saw was that it doesn't matter how big the system is, how strong the system is, how complicated the system is, it can still fail, and it failed. No one thought that this whole process would fail. No one thought that a country as big as US could just walk away or lose the whole process, but it did. So I think that's why, since I've lived in the US for over 16 years now, that is a lifetime. And I spent most of the years in New York City. Like I said earlier, I love New York City. I don't know why, but I love it. I feel it. I don't have a country, but I feel very at home in New York. There's something about it. I actually took a year road trip last year since I was working from home. I pretty much traveled for a year from Maine all the way through the South. I went to Florida, the Carolinas, New Orleans, and every state in between. And with the intention of like, okay, let me stay there for a month or a couple of months, really get to know people's take at life, understand them, explore their way of living, explore their food, their music, and their culture. It was funny because while I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot, and it was amazing discovery, a year of discovery for me, towards the end, I was longing to be back in New York City. So with that, I think I can't imagine anything happening. I can't even tolerate the thought of anything happening to New York City. But I think that being said, what I've the recent observation of what's going on in the US, like the lack of tolerance, right, that is in the past few years, the increased division, the polarization of the society, and how many people right now are suffering from lack of freedom of speech. Voices are canceled, voices are silenced, whether that's a good voice or a bad voice. I think that's why it might just be a debate or an argument or a news article for a lot of people in the US. But for me, every time I see them, it triggers PTSD in me because I've seen it happening. I know that like the more we silence the voices, and instead of actually having a discussion about it, instead of actually engaging and talking about it, it's just only going to get worse. And it really scares me. And I think it really scares me that it's more about winning an argument rather than having a conversation to enrich your opinion by talking about something that you don't agree or you disagree. I think I remember reading somewhere that someone said that let it be a lot of bad voices, only a lot of good voices is going to kill it. So we have to have let those voices actually talk to each other. And I think most importantly, we can't take for granted what we have in this country. It doesn't matter how big and how powerful this country is today. We can't get complacent. And I think, so for me, this year has been really hard because I saw what happened, I saw what's possible. And then at the same time, when I see what is actually happening right now, things that maybe some of us don't even observe that is happening. Or I'm more sensitive to it now than before. Maybe it was always like this all these years. I was just not picking it up. But I think it's scary, and it scares me. And I really hope that, I think what you guys are having here today, like the fact that you want to have a dialogue, you want to engage, you want to talk about something like a topic. I really hope there's more of this, and that we continue to engage, and we really stop silencing different voices, and we walk away from this cancel culture that is spreading really, really fast in our society. So that, I'm just going to pause here. I know this was a gloomy, doomy story, but that is the reality of life. Sometimes we just have to have some of these conversations.
I'm searching for words to share as you share. I'm just so deeply touched by your personal journey and the pain, and even this sense of unknown. What does it look like to not having a working passport, and what it had to be like for you in August during that hour when everything was collapsing, the impossible was happening before your eyes. I'm also very mindful of your family members that you just talked about, and my heart goes out to them.
Thank you.
As you share today, when you share this, what feels like just a really vast, overwhelming complex problem now. What are steps that people can do, do you feel, like people here in Pikeville, Kentucky, what is something do you feel like we could do in response to the needs and the plight right now?
I think we have to start small, right? We have to, at the end of the day, this whole world is just a community of people and humans like me and you. I think we have to engage. We have to start small. We have to have those difficult conversations with each other about those topics in different parts of our life that we have a strong opinion about. We have to do that. We have to not take for granted what we have in this country to begin with. Because I have kind of stopped thinking about Afghanistan politics. I think it's too complicated. It's too hard to understand it. And I don't think as a human I can do anything about it. I look at Afghanistan as just a community of humans. I don't look at it as a country anymore. It just happened to be a group of humans that I relate with their story. I think that's pretty much about it. I don't think there's more that we can do. Yeah, I think there are fundraisings, there are supports because most of the country lives under poverty. I think those are the more tactical steps that can be taken place. Afghanistan is very cold, by the way, and people cannot afford to heat their house right now. So that's one of the biggest challenge. But then when you kind of boil down to like the basic human needs, which is shelter, safety, food, right? Those are the things we're talking right now in Afghanistan. I think it's hard to have like come up with a solution what to do. We as like myself and other Afghans here, some American friends, like we've been thinking about different ways to try to help. I think, in my opinion, is just to figure out a way to move more people. But it's very hard. It's very, very hard. For reference, I live in the US for over 16 years. The US, in my opinion, although most would disagree with it, it still has one of the best immigration system compared to the rest of the world. But it's taking me over 16 years to get an American passport. That's how complicated it is. That being said, there's still options, but it takes time. So I think there are some organizations that are working on the immediate help, immediate need to just provide food and shelter, but it's very hard to support 30 million people continuously for a long time. Like, that's not sustainable. So that's why I think it's also hard to like, which problem do you want to fix first? Like, what do you do about those girls who cannot go back to school? We're going to have another generation that are not educated. What do you do about all those boys who had dreams to graduate, to start businesses, to build their own empires or build their dreams? Like, boys are equally impacted right now. Professors don't have autonomy over what to teach at schools. Like, you can't teach what you want to teach. So I think it's hard, but I think regardless of where we are, we can definitely start to listen more, engage more, be more tolerant, and be aware that we need to be more tolerant.
That's really, really helpful. Just the real commitment to start small, to listen, to lean in, to have those conversations. That's really, really helpful. I know that you are on a board. Could you tell us a little bit about that board that you're on and the cause they're working for?
Yeah, so it's the same organization as called the Initiative to Educate Afghan Women. This is the organization that gave me scholarship, the one that I said one woman had started. So after I graduated, I joined the board so I can help grow the organization. And the organization is looking to bring girls from Afghanistan to take them to different colleges. So we usually work with universities to get scholarship for girls who actually speak English fluently, so they can come and pursue their 4 years of degree. So that's one avenue that we're trying to bring, maybe one girl at a time, give them an education, help them become independent, because that one person can support the whole family eventually. And in my opinion, I think that the best way to help Afghan women and men for that is to just give them quality liberal arts education, and then let them be on their own and flourish on their own.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if others have some questions now or responses to what's been shared. Feel free to unmute yourself and share, or type a question in the chat box and we can facilitate that.
Wazhma, I was thinking about when we were together at Randolph College, and I'm not sure I remember one other student from Afghanistan, but you came alone and you found a community. It was a highly international community and student body. And then I'm thinking about your life in New York, and you touched on it a little bit, but I'm wondering about your community. Have you been able to, you have friends, but have you been able to find other Afghans who can help you with that compass and that sense of working through these difficulties and just relating to each other in a way that I think only people probably from that complex part of the world can do?
Yeah, so New York City doesn't have a significant Afghan community, but I do have friends from Afghanistan who have moved, friends that I've met here, but they just live in different parts of the United States. But the support model or the community that I was able to develop over the years in New York City, you'll be amazed that doesn't have a single Afghan. But at the end of the day, it kind of boils down that maybe our experiences are different, but how we feel about them, how it makes us feel, kind of is the same regardless of like where people are coming from. I think at the end of the day, we all want to be happy, live happily, be nice. I think those fundamental things about humans are very, very much the same. And I think I learned that at Randolph. The year that I joined Randolph, we have students from 30 plus countries. And that's when it really opened it up for me. It was like, okay, it doesn't really matter where you're from, because you could start, like my best friend is, Professor Dugan, right? My best friend is a girl from China. Some of my other best friends are from other countries. I have really good friends, American friends. And I think while you might have relevant experiences, the emotions are very much the same. You kind of saw that during beginning of COVID, right? When it got hard, everyone had to look for their own family. Everyone had to look for ways to feed their own family. So, and some of like the feelings people were going through at the beginning of COVID was very similar to me. Like they weren't new feelings for me. I had seen my parents go through that multiple times. I knew what that felt like. So yeah, and I think I'm probably lucky that I just don't have Afghan friends. I have friends from all walks of life, from all different countries, and New York gives you even more of that kind of exposure. And like just going to museums, looking at people's work who are not even alive, but then you look at them closely, you're like, okay, I kind of know what this person was probably going through, or I can feel that.
Thinking about you at Randolph, I definitely remember your friendships and your international sisterhood. And you really did have such a rich group of students and friends. And it was, I can see how your answer makes a lot of sense to me now when I think back on those memories, and what a great kind of how you could weave in between cultures and move and grow as a result. I'm so glad to hear that you have developed some of the same in New York.
Thank you.
We do have a question about when it comes to if a person's trying to like send something to Afghanistan or send supplies, is that something that is possible right now in the midst of this kind of governmentless environment in Afghanistan?
No, there's no post office. So you can't really send anything through the formal systems. You can send money like through the banking system, but the way we have been working with it is they're actually unofficial, almost like they're unofficial people that you give the money here. They have like representative back in Afghanistan who then give the money to your families. So that's what we have been doing, like because we have a lot of friends, families, and people, other people that we know, that people who are very independent, who had their whole lives, but then they lost all their savings, their home value is down to zero, and they can't afford to pay food. And inflation has skyrocketed because the borders are closed and it's hard to import food. So there are channels that have been built in the past few months through which we send money and then have people buy food for their families.
Thank you.
Wazhma, is there an NGO or a UN agency or any organization like that that you find is doing a good job at reaching people?
There are a few grassroots organizations and a couple of NGOs. I haven't heard a lot about what UN is doing that are actually trying to help. And we have seen evidence of them on the ground doing work. I'm happy to share some of those names if that's what you're looking for.
Yes, please, that would be great. Thank you.
But even, I think that's a problem, even those organizations, they can't work publicly, right?
Right.
So that's why it's really hard. But I think there are a couple that are brave enough that they're still trying to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a question. I just have a comment. First, I apologize for being late to your talk. I had a meeting that ran long, but I've been looking forward to this ever since Dean Dugan told me about it yesterday. I've been really looking forward to hearing your talk. But I remember all of this playing out on the news, and it was all that was covered for weeks. And I remember being so heartbroken about it. But you know, it's really easy for us to just stop thinking about it when the news stops showing it to us, and shame on us.
Yeah, I wouldn't say shame on us. I think it's just human nature, right? We get busy with life, things takes priority. But yeah, those weeks in August were rough. The Afghan community in the US, I don't know anyone who slept for days and nights because everyone was trying to make sure they can help get their family members out, including myself. My family was actually supposed to be on the plane, the last plane leaving from Afghanistan during that evacuation period. We got notice that, so it was very hard to get people out too, by the way, because if you were trying to get towards the airport, the Taliban would harass you because they knew you're a friend of Americans. That's why you're being evacuated. Like the family member that is mentally challenged, we were trying to get him out. It was really hard to get an approval to get him out to begin with, but we finally were able to put him on a list. It was around 5 o'clock in the morning. We asked them that they need to go to the airport, but that was it. They just told them, come to the airport. We don't know. There's like no visa, nothing, right? They waited outside the airport until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, couldn't get in. And this particular family member is fully dependent on someone else. But then right at that time, like, we're like, okay, maybe you should go back home, because it's like 12 hours for someone who's not healthy, staying outside in a crowd of people. They went home, and right at the gate that they were waiting, 2 hours after that was the blast that we saw on the news. And after that, they shut down the airport. There were no more flights after that. And every time I think about it, I was like, I can't imagine if what if I had told them, no, wait there? Like, because I was the one who was like, no, just stay there. Hopefully you'll get in. But somehow they got lucky that we said, no, maybe you should go back home. So it could get worse. But thankfully that they're safe, but we can't stop thinking about them, because although we have applied for them to get them out of the country, there has been no progress made. We don't know what will happen, whether we can get them out or not. Our biggest fear is that the last time Taliban took over, they disconnected telecommunication. Our biggest fear is that may happen one day. It's only about time. It's a ticking bomb. One day they're going to disconnect internet and telephone communication, and we may lose that family member altogether. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully, we see some green light and we can take him to safety somewhere outside Afghanistan.
As you shared, I was so taken by the rhythm of the up and down idea of hope, and in 2001, and then when your family moves back in 2004, there's just this infusing of hope, like there's a new day. And then of course in August, within an hour, you said it kind of felt like the world had ended. Is there any sense now, I know we're so early into this journey, is there any sense that the nightmare of the Taliban could somehow be removed, or is that just such a far fantasy that's not even on people's radars?
Yeah, the latter. I don't know how, maybe a miracle. It's really, that's why I think this time it was really hard, because suddenly there was absolutely no hope left. And that hopelessness, I think, is very hard to go through. We still don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I hope we see it. I hope things change. Because 30+ million lives, I think it'll be sad if this continues for too long.
Thank you for that. Other questions that people may have?
Wazhma, I just want to kind of honor the love you have in your heart to have come here this morning and share obviously difficult and very powerful stories, and share yourself with us. And I just want to personally thank you. And I think this here this morning, or I don't know if it's being recorded, but it is being recorded. It's going to impact a lot of people and getting us thinking and talking with each other. There's a lot of thinking and talking that has to happen, like you said before. We can come to some common ground about the sacredness of human life and our relationship with each other. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the time and listening to my story. I know it's not a very exciting story, but thank you for giving me the time. And I really appreciate what you guys are doing, like the fact that you're trying to engage and talk about these difficult conversations. I think that's the right approach. Coming from someone who have gone through so much, we have to talk, we have to engage. There's no other way. At the end of the day, regardless of where you belong, which passport you have, we're all just humans. We have to figure out a way to coexist and not to increase the division that we see right now, and not to silence each other.
Well, I echo what Dr. Dugan has said, and for the 30 million people that you are lifting up this morning and sharing with us about. I do have one final question. This may be maybe kind of outside your purview, but I wonder about English speaking information that's coming out of the country. Is there any like source or reporter or someone that the Afghan community in the United States is really like trusting or leaning into to find out what's really going on the ground?
I would have to double check. There aren't a lot of English materials coming out. Even the ones that are in local language, they're heavily censored right now. The ones that are sharing, they kind of warn you, they're telling us that it's censored. But I think we get our insight is usually just talking to friends and family members. But I'll double check. I'll see if there are any good materials out there that I could share. I'll happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Again, on behalf of the University of Pikeville, we really appreciate your time, but really, I think that your willingness to share your story, your heart, and something that's really, really fresh in the journey since August. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Sure, my pleasure.
Okay,
Bye, Wazhma.
great day.
Bye.
Bye.